friends, my name is Marines and I'm back with another wrap-up video for books I've read in 2018. I'm doing my best. Book number 26 was Baptism of Fire by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the 5th book in the Witcher series, which I've been reading on and off since last year, inspired by the video games based on these books, which I love. This is an adult fantasy series and we follow the main character Geralt, who is a witcher, which is essentially like a genetically modified monster hunter for hire. Geralt is supposed to be emotionless because of the way that they altered him and politically neutral, and basically across the course of the series we watch him fall in love and form some deep family connections and try to stay politically neutral, but it's difficult because there's an ever-expanding war. I enjoyed book 5, this book, a lot more than I enjoyed book 4, primarily because we got to spend a lot more time with Geralt. I loved the first 2 books of short stories and I even loved the 3rd book. I think that 4 and 5 have felt a lot like filler. There are a lot of moving pieces, and again, it's like a big war and lots of people are jumping in and countries are jumping into the war, and there's a lot of that kind of wartime planning, which isn't always my favorite, but it also just feels like filler right now, like we're getting all of the pieces into place. My main complaint about the series has always been its portrayal of women, and in this book we get introduced to a female character whom I really enjoy, and yet her plot it's bordering on a mystic pregnancy, which is a trope that you really hate to see pop up, especially when you have like so few female characters to choose from. I love Geralt. Ciri is my second favorite character, and in this book she doesn't have a lot to do except for we're watching her fall in love with like killing people, and that whole side plot is very weird to me. It's kind of derailing us from the thing that I fell in love with the Witcher series in general, and it was like Geralt going around and killing monsters, and now we're like knee deep in like war and child murderers and stuff. So I don't know, it's hard to say. I was really excited to maybe finish off all of the published novels of the Witcher series in 2018, but after book 5 I picked up book 6 and I've been reading it since I finished book 5, which was many months ago. So I love the beginning of the series, but it's kind of letting me down as we go on. I ended up giving Baptism of Fire 3.5 out of 5 stars. Book number 27 was Borne by VanderMeer. This is adult science fiction dystopian new weird about a ruined city and a scavenger named Rachel who comes across a creature, an organism that she doesn't know what it is, but she takes it home with her, and then the rest of the story is about her discovering what it is, but also discovering more about herself and her partner and the mysteries of the ruined city and what ruined it. I did a full review on this book, which you can check out here, but the long and short of it is that I loved the beginning of the story. I loved getting to meet Rachel, and I loved all of the ways that this story explored some themes about family and about humanity and what makes a person a person. The issue started for me in the middle of the book through the end. The pacing of the story is very inconsistent, and I thought that the middle chunk of the story was very slow, and it took me a while to get through, and then you hit the climax and resolution and you just zip by it so fast that I wasn't even really sure what happened at the end. I had to go back and make sure that I was following everything and I understood everything. So the pacing inconsistency really ruined the story for me. Not ruined, ruined is a strong word, but it was just such a strong and promising beginning, and then middle, and then a really fast end. And so overall that whole experience was about a 3.5 out of 5 star as well. Book number 28 was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. This is adult contemporary romance about a math whiz named Stella who struggles forming relationships because of her Asperger's. So basically she decides to hire an escort to practice relationships and sex, but of course it becomes something more. I enjoyed reading this a lot, and I totally get why people love this story, but there were a couple things that were just not my particular cup of tea and that kept it from being a favorite. First is that the beginning is sex heavy, which duh, but also it felt a little clunky in the way that they were doing it because we kept jumping around in time and in the story and just like skipping things just to basically get to the sex. It felt like we weren't establishing anything else for these characters or anything anything outside of just this one relationship. That improves for sure in the second half of the book, but then the second half of the book revolves all around one of my biggest pet peeves, and it is conflict because nobody will use their words. Literally, if just somebody would explain, there would not be a conflict or a second half of the book. And it just, man, it bothers me every time. Otherwise, this was cute. I love the protagonist so much. It was a smooth, easy read, and I gave this also 3.5 out of 5 stars. Book number 29 was Magic Slays by Ilona Andrews, the 5th book in the Kate Daniel series. This is an adult urban fantasy series about a monster killer for hire. And I'm also on the 5th book. Look at me go with these kinds of series in this year. I'm still enjoying the series, especially because now I am so invested in so many of these characters, including Kate. I continue to just love her and everything that she is, and her sassiness and her strength and everything that's going on with Kate I love, and the little farm family that she's building around her. All of that has my feelings, and so I'm invested in this series. That said, by book 5 you can really start to tell the things that get repetitive, and that is that I'm reading these books far apart. I binged the first 2 maybe, and I was like, whoa, gotta slow down. So I've been spacing them out, which I think is the correct way to read them. I enjoyed all of the plot elements in this one that had to do with her starting her own business and her relationship with Julie and figuring out how to be a leader and how to lead people. I did not enjoy the final battle. I feel like every book we have this like final battle, and it feels like the author has to keep upping the stakes. It didn't quite work for me in this book. Additionally, there was a lot of like long speeches in this one. People just standing around explaining plot things or lore or things like that, which the first books I think were a little info dumpy. They could be, especially when they were trying to describe the magic and the different creatures that get introduced, but this one specifically stood out to me for having very long speeches. I found myself skipping over them and looking for the action and the humor. I ended up giving this, can you guess, 3.5 out of 5 stars. I didn't do this on purpose. I was in a 3.5 mood apparently as I was reading all of these. Book number 30 was The Tudors, The History of England from Henry VIII to Elizabeth I by Peter Ackroyd. Okay, so I went to London this summer, and this was my second time going to London. It was lovely. I think that I actually fell in love with London this time. The first time it was kind of like, yeah, that was a city, but I don't know, something about this trip just really made me love London. I was there with my family, and because I was the only one who had ever been there, I became like the de facto tour guide basically, but I also didn't know a lot of what was going on, so they kept asking me questions, and I was like, listen, I don't know. Thank God my cell phone worked over there, so I was like Googling things, but it got me very interested in Tudor history. So I found this book and I started reading it on the plane ride back from London. It had a lot of information and I found it enjoyable for the most part. My issue with the book was that it tried to look at a lot of different aspects from each ruler's time on the throne. So it would look at like the religion stuff, it would look at the economy, it would look at their personal lives and how things were going with other countries. And so you would get the pieces of that story of like the economy while King Henry VIII was on the throne. But then they would overlap. Like you can't talk about the economy or war with other countries without talking about how Henry VIII started his own religion. And so it was overlapping, which makes sense, but then it was becoming repetitive, and something that I had just read about when we were talking about religion crops up again, and he just repeated a lot of the same information. It was good in terms of like feeling like I really absorbed the information, but it slowed down the reading experience overall. I marked this as 4 stars when I read it, but now I'm thinking it should have been 3.5 out of 5 stars. Book number 31 was Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. This is a YA contemporary about a girl who makes a wildly popular webcomic anonymously and what happens when her identity is outed. I love this so much. We read it for Snark Squad Pod specifically because we invited Chelsea from The Reading Outlaw back on the show and we asked her to pick something for us to read, and she picked this, so I'm super thankful for her. It was such a heartwarming story, but one that relies very heavily on your ability to sympathize and empathize with the main character, Eliza. Her behavior isn't always the best, but that's being human. Reading about her experience with mental health and creating things online and with community and with her her relationship with her parents and her single-minded tunnel vision kind of coping mechanisms. All of that was just really amazing and refreshing to see in a book. The second half of the book does lose a little bit of momentum for me, and the main character, the love interest, I'm not thrilled with how his story was wrapped up, but that's a personal preference thing. Like, I would have liked to see it go some other way. Also, she includes excerpts of the webcomic into the story, so you get a story within a story almost, and it was very beautiful to look at, and I loved the idea of it, but there's something about it. I also struggled with the inclusion of the fanfic in Fangirl when I read it. I struggled with a lot of other things in Fangirl too, but it was similar in the way that I enjoyed them kind of isolated from everything else, but sometimes they just felt a little too dropped into the story, or a little like I couldn't connect each piece of the webcomic as I was reading through the story and trying to keep that straight. So it didn't ruin the story for me. I like to see the art, but it wasn't my favorite thing about the book. If you want to hear our full thoughts about Eliza and her monsters, we do talk a lot about internet culture, and specifically about the things that Eliza goes through and the feelings that it gave us. So if you want to hear us talk all about that, you can check out the podcast episode. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. Book number 32 was a reread of Volume 1 of Sweet Tooth by Jeff LeMire. I reread this specifically because I suggested that we cover it on an episode of the podcast, and before I sent it off, my copies to Nicole, I was like, well, let me reread, because is there enough content there to talk about it for an hour? So I picked this one up. After reading, my decision about talking about it on a podcast episode is that I'm postponing making a decision. I'm not sure. And I only reread the first volume, so I probably have to reread the whole thing before really deciding, but anyways, that's what I did. This is a really great first volume of a series. It's always very difficult to talk about first volumes because there is not a ton of content here. I'm used to talking about things that are a little longer, hence my hesitation overall, but this is a really great first volume. It does a good job of setting up the world and the characters, but getting you invested in the story immediately and caring about our main character Gus immediately. He is a human-animal hybrid that has to survive in this dystopian world, and you really get a feel for the grittiness of this world and the stakes of this world right in this first volume. And man, now I really should just keep rereading the series. And if you guys have read this and think that we could talk about it for an hour on the podcast, let me know. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on first read and agree with that rating still on second read. That's it for me today. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, let's chat down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. Wish me luck as I continue my mad dash to the end of the year to make content and wrap up the things that I read and actually hit my reading goal.